Hello, my name is Jessica Murray, and today I will be presenting a monster review of the vampire Carmilla. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu was the original creator of Carmilla, and his novella titled Carmilla was published in 1872. The story of Carmilla is unique because she is the first female vampire protagonist to be created. In addition to this, Le Fanu stepped outside the box while creating Carmilla's character because she possesses some abilities that are unique from other vampire characters, and she treats her victims differently compared to other literary monsters. Carmilla was published 26 years before the classic vampire Dracula. Since Carmilla's release, this character has influenced many other vampire characters, especially Dracula, and many interpretations of her story have been created throughout the years. Carmilla is a monster for three main reasons. Firstly, she preys on innocent young girls without suffering any consequences and for no apparent reason. Secondly, she has a deceiving appearance. She is a young girl on the outside with the alter ego of a terrifying beast. Finally, she opposes male dominance throughout the story. Across mediums and time periods, she becomes less monstrous, and her relationships, both romantic and familial, become more important to her story. This causes retellings to transform from a description of a supernatural encounter with a monster to a story of a tragic romance. In the original novella, Laura is a young girl who later becomes Carmilla's love interest and victim. She lives with her father in a large and isolated castle. One day, Carmilla and her mother are involved in a carriage accident, which brings Carmilla under their supervision. When Laura and Carmilla meet, they recognize each other from a vivid past dream they both share. However, Laura shakes this off and begins to develop a close friendship with the odd and mysterious Carmilla. Meanwhile, girls in a nearby village are dying from attacks by a vampire named Millarca, and Laura herself becomes sick as well. While seeking treatment for Laura, she and her father learn that Millarca and Carmilla are the same people, and eventually Carmilla is killed by a vampire hunter. Throughout the story, Carmilla is called by three different names: Carmilla, Millarca, and Mircalla. Carmilla is a countess, which is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as a woman holding the rank of a count or earl in her own right. An earl can be defined as a man of noble birth or rank. Carmilla has several monstrous qualities. All of her victims are innocents. They are always young girls. She destroys a village neighboring Laura's residence and murders all the girls there without ever facing any consequences, and without a clear reason other than she is a monster. She has an uncontrolled desire toward her victims, especially whenever it comes to Laura. She pursues Laura romantically multiple times, sometimes inappropriately, before Laura eventually begins to reciprocate her affection. In some cases, Carmilla's homosexuality might also be one of her monstrous traits, although in the original novella there is no evidence to indicate that this is a negative quality of the character. Finally, Carmilla's story rejects male dominance in many ways, which will be discussed in depth later. In Laura's description, Carmilla is considered odd in multiple ways. She sleeps all day long, and she does so in a coffin. She becomes upset when those around her participate in religious activities. She has clear episodes of depression and mania, where she is extremely active and euphoric at one moment, and then inert and unhappy in the next moment. Physically, Carmilla is an extremely beautiful young girl, but she has a mysterious, dark, large, cat-like alter ego. She can also pass through walls, and she is essentially immortal. The reinterpretation I would like to compare to the original novella by Le Fanu is a 2015 thriller film called The Unwanted that was created by Brentwood. There are some major differences in the literary devices used by these two sources. The original novella takes place in Austria in the 19th century. Laura describes her father as having a small income, but because they live in an isolated location, her father was able to afford a castle where the main story takes place. Middle-age technology is seen throughout the text. For example, Laura describes a moat that has never been lowered that surrounds the castle, and Carmilla meets the family after her carriage crashed. On the other hand, the 2015 film takes place in South Carolina in the 21st century. Carmilla herself is of a low socioeconomic status, and modern technology is present. For example, the bus that Carmilla uses to travel to the small southern town. The novella begins with many detailed descriptions from Laura which set the tone for the rest of the story. Laura describes the beautiful castle in detail, which gives a fairy tale-like tone to the introduction. However, as the story progresses, the descriptions become darker and more mysterious, as the supernatural elements and unknown history of the odd Carmilla come about. Aside from Laura's direct descriptions, there are few similes and metaphors present. On the other hand, the film contains no supernatural elements whatsoever, and therefore lacks this mysterious tone. Instead, the tone of the film is overwhelmed by the drama present from family history and the romance between Laura and Carmilla. Imagery is created mainly through establishing shots before each scene, and there is a lack of direct descriptions, which are difficult to smoothly achieve in film compared to text. Finally, the two interpretations differ in the point of view from which the story is told. The novella is told from a first-person perspective, specifically through Laura's perspective, and the film is told from a third-person perspective, another limitation that comes with the film medium. Several key character changes also take place between the interpretations. In the novella, Carmilla is a young girl, while in the film she is an adult. Her age contributes to her deceptive appearance in the novella as a young girl, and makes her a convenient scapegoat in the film, which Laura's father blames for Laura's self-harming tendencies. Carmilla's names all refer to the same person in the novella, while in the film, Millarca refers to Carmilla's mother. Carmilla's mother plays a much larger role in the film in general. Carmilla meets Laura while seeking out her mother, and while Carmilla is dying, she sees a vision of her mother who reveals to her that she is a vampire. Her mother is critical to the plot and the story's theme of self-discovery, whereas in the novella she is merely a side character. The biggest difference between the two interpretations comes from the fact that Carmilla has many monstrous qualities in the novella, while she's not a monster whatsoever in the film. As a result, the novella reads like a dark description of a supernatural encounter with a monster, while the film is more focused on Laura and Carmilla's tragic romantic relationship. Finally, in the novella, Carmilla is fully aware of her abilities as a vampire, contributing further to her monstrousness, while in the film she has no awareness of this until her dying breath. As mentioned earlier, Carmilla's mother plays a much larger role in the film than in the novella, and this change translates into significant plot changes as well. In the novella, Laura's father is a passive side character, while in the film he is constantly paranoid when it comes to Carmilla's presence. In the film, he is obvious about the fact that he dislikes Carmilla and thinks she is a bad influence on Laura. He even makes some romantic advances towards Carmilla, perhaps to assert dominance, which is never seen in the original story. Adding to Carmilla's lack of monstrous qualities in the film, she never attacks Laura and instead tries to encourage Laura against her self-harming tendencies, as opposed to Carmilla's clear attack on Laura that took place in the novella. Finally, different people killed Carmilla at the end of the story, depending on the version. In the novella, a vampire killer who was not related to Laura murdered Carmilla, while Laura's father killed Carmilla in the film version, which further enhances the tragic tone. The original novella is interesting because the male and female characters go against stereotypical men and women of the time. For example, the men are quite useless. Laura's father passively accepts Carmilla into their home and can't do anything to help Laura while she is sick. On the other hand, the male character in the film constantly asserts his dominance and disapproval over Laura whenever she acts rebellious, which is typical for modern male characters. In addition to this, the female characters are quite powerful in the original story. When Carmilla's mother drops her off at the castle, the exchange between her and Carmilla's father occurs so that both parties involved are equal. In addition, Carmilla's character is powerful in so many regards, especially when her immortality is considered. When her ashes are spread by the river by the vampire hunter, there's an indication that her immortality continues, even though she has been murdered. This difference in the way that male and female characters are represented in the two interpretations could come from the fact that Lefanu was from the feminized country of Ireland, while Brett Wood resides in the present United States. The film also contains several themes that are not seen in the novella. As previously mentioned, self-discovery is a big theme because Carmilla is seeking out her mother's story, and she learns more about herself, especially that she is a vampire in the process, while Laura discovers more about her sexuality upon meeting Carmilla. There is a constant sense of homophobia and mistrust, especially from Laura's father, which could stem from his Christian religious background and the fact that Carmilla is an adult in the film, and is therefore easier to blame for Laura's self-harming behavior. In conclusion, the film medium in general has limitations, especially in terms of perspective and imagery, which cause the film interpretation of the story to be quite different from the novella. In terms of the story content, the adjustment of supernatural elements from the novella to the film caused the two interpretations to be completely different stories, and for the character of Carmilla to change as well. The novella was essentially a retelling of an encounter with a supernatural monster, while the film was a tragic romance. In the novella, Carmilla was a monstrous being, while in the film she was just an adult seeking self-discovery. This reveals how the limitations of certain mediums can cause adaptations of literary works, such as this one, to possibly lose some of their description and expression. In addition, supernatural elements, when used in stories of monsters, play a large role in the story structure than is expected. Here is the list of references I used for this presentation.